The ramp drops. Ice-cold water hits your chest like a wall of concrete. The man standing next to you falls before his feet even touch the bottom. The man in front of him is already gone. Bullets are cutting through the water inches from your face, like invisible knives. You have 90 pounds of gear strapped to your body, dragging you straight down into the cold, dark water below. There are 200 yards of open beach in front of you, and every single inch of it is being covered by German machine guns that have been sitting up on those cliffs, waiting for this exact moment. This is Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944. You are an American soldier, and you have exactly 60 minutes to survive. Most of the men who stood where you are standing right now did not make it, and by the time this video is over, you are going to understand exactly why you wouldn't have made it either. Let's go back to the night before, because surviving D-Day didn't start on the beach. It started the moment you climbed into that landing craft in the dark hours of June 5th and began the slow, terrifying journey across the English Channel toward the coast of France. You had been training for this moment for months. You knew the plan. You had studied the maps. You had practiced the landing drills over and over until they felt automatic. But nothing about what you were feeling right now felt automatic. Everything felt wrong. The English Channel at night in early June is not a gentle body of water. The waves were hitting 4 to 6 feet that morning, and the small metal landing craft you were packed into was being thrown around like a toy in a bathtub. There were 30 men crammed into a space barely big enough for 20. The smell of diesel fuel and seawater and fear was overwhelming. Almost every man around you was sick within the first 30 minutes. Some were vomiting over the sides. Some were vomiting on themselves. Some were just sitting there with their heads down trying to hold it together. And you still had 3 hours to go before the ramp dropped. You hadn't slept in over 2 days. The army had given you a small paper bag of rations before you boarded, but nobody was eating. Your hands wouldn't stop shaking, and you kept telling yourself it was the cold. It wasn't the cold, it was the fact that you were 19 years old, and 6 months ago, you were working on a farm in Ohio, or stocking shelves in a grocery store in Georgia, and now you were crossing the English Channel in the dark, heading toward the most heavily defended stretch of coastline in the history of warfare. You knew what was waiting on those beaches. Everyone knew. And knowing made the 3 hours feel like 3 years. While you were sitting in that landing craft, being sick and shaking and praying, the Germans had spent the last 3 years turning the beaches of Normandy into something they called the Atlantic Wall. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the man Hitler had personally put in charge of defending the French coast, had looked at those beaches and made one decision that would cost thousands of American lives. He decided that the battle would be won or lost in the first hour. He said that if the Allies made it off the beaches and into the French countryside, the war was over. So he made sure that getting off those beaches would be as close to impossible as any military mind could design. In the water approaching Omaha Beach, the Germans had placed thousands of steel obstacles just below the surface. Some were simple steel poles angled toward the incoming boats, designed to rip the hulls open before the ramp even dropped. Others were topped with mines, so that the moment a landing craft touched them, the explosion would kill everyone inside before a single boot hit the water. Between the water obstacles and the sand, they had laid thousands of landmines buried just deep enough that you couldn't see them, but shallow enough that the weight of a boot would set them off. The sand itself was a minefield, and at the top of the cliffs overlooking the beach, the Germans had built concrete bunkers that housed MG-42 machine guns. The MG-42 was not a normal machine gun. It fired 1,200 rounds per minute. That is 20 bullets every single second. Each bunker was positioned at an angle to the beach so that the bullets would sweep across the sand in an overlapping pattern, leaving no safe ground anywhere. The Americans called it a killing ground. The Germans called it a perfect defensive position. And in a few hours, you are going to have to walk across every inch of it. It is 6:30 in the morning. The sky is gray, and the noise is unlike anything you have ever heard in your life. Shells from American battleships are flying overhead toward the cliffs. Planes are somewhere above the clouds dropping bombs. The sound is so loud it is physical. You can feel it in your chest, in your teeth. The landing craft is slowing down, and the men around you are standing up and gripping their rifles and not looking at each other. Because if you look at each other, you might see what you are all feeling, and nobody wants to see that right now. The ramp drops, and in that single second, everything you trained for, everything you planned, for everything you thought you were prepared for disappears completely, because nothing prepared you for this. The men in the front of the boat step off the ramp, and some of them immediately disappear under the water. The ramp dropped in a spot where the water is over their heads, and they are gone before they can even react. The men behind them have no choice but to follow. You step off into chest-deep water, and the cold hits you like a physical blow. The weight of your gear is pulling you down. The current is pulling you sideways. And from the cliffs above, the German machine guns open up on the water and the sand and everything in between. The noise is impossible to describe. Bullets hitting water sound like a whip cracking over and over and over, thousands of times a second. Men around you are falling. Some are screaming. Some are not making any sound at all, which is somehow worse. You cannot run in chest-deep water. You can only push forward one step at a time, while everything around you is chaos and noise and death. The 200 yards of beach in front of you looks like the longest distance you have ever seen in your life, and you have only been in the water for 30 seconds. Here is something the history books don't usually tell you about D-Day. The water temperature in the English Channel on June 6, 1944, was approximately 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That is cold enough that the human body begins showing signs of cold shock within the first minute of exposure. Your blood vessels constrict, your heart rate spikes, your breathing becomes fast and uncontrolled. In water that cold, a fully fit adult human being has meaningful swimming ability for approximately 30 minutes before the muscles begin to fail. You have been in this water for 2 minutes, and you can already feel your fingers going numb around your rifle. Your body is also doing something else at the same time. It is flooding your system with more adrenaline than you will ever feel at any other moment in your entire life. Your pupils are dilated. Your pain receptors are partially suppressed. Your brain has narrowed its focus to a single point, which is the sand in front of you. This is why soldiers who survived Omaha Beach consistently reported the same experience in interviews decades later. They said they didn't feel the wounds they received on that beach until hours afterward. One soldier named John Barnes was hit by shrapnel in the first few minutes on the beach and didn't realize it until he reached the sand and looked down. His body had simply decided that the information wasn't useful right now. But the adrenaline also does something dangerous. It makes you feel like you can survive this. It makes your brain start to think that if you just keep moving, if you just keep pushing forward, you are going to make it. And that feeling is both the thing that kills you and the thing that saves you at the same time. Because the men who stopped moving on Omaha Beach died, every account from every survivor says the same thing. The men who froze, the men who couldn't make their legs move forward, those men did not come home. The only thing that worked on that beach was forward. You make it to the sand. You are alive. And the sand is not safety. The sand is just a different place to die. The first thing you notice when you get out of the water is the noise changes. In the water, the gunfire sounded muffled and distant, even though it was close. On the sand, it is immediate and sharp and everywhere. You throw yourself flat and press your face into the wet sand, and you can feel the vibration of explosions through the ground beneath you. You look up, and ahead of you is 200 yards of open beach with almost no cover at all. There are bodies in the sand around you. There are wounded men who cannot move. There are men who have lost their weapons in the water and are lying there with nothing. The officer who was supposed to lead your unit onto the beach is gone. You don't know if he is dead or still in the water. The sergeant who was supposed to give the orders is crouched behind the body of a fallen soldier, and he looks as lost as everyone else. The radio that was supposed to connect your unit to command is somewhere at the bottom of the English Channel. Everything that was supposed to happen is not happening. General Omar Bradley, the American general overseeing the entire Omaha Beach landing, was watching from a ship offshore through binoculars, and what he saw horrified him so completely that he later wrote in his personal notes that he seriously considered abandoning the beach entirely and redirecting all remaining forces to Utah Beach, where the landing was going better. That is how bad it looked from a distance. And you are not watching from a distance. You are in the middle of it with sand in your mouth, and the sound of machine gun fire so constant it stops sounding like individual shots and starts sounding like one endless tearing noise that doesn't stop. And then something happened that no military planner planned for and no German defensive strategy accounted for. Small groups of American soldiers started moving on their own, not because someone ordered them to, not because the plan said to, but because they looked at the beach, and they looked at the cliffs, and they made the same calculation that Sergeant William Stivison later put into words when he said, "We figured we were going to die on this beach anyway, so we might as well die moving towards something." Groups of 5 and 6 and 7 men started finding the gaps between the German defensive positions. They started moving up the draws, the natural gullies in the cliffs that led from the beach to the high ground above. They were not following orders. They were following the only logic that made sense on Omaha Beach that morning, which was that staying still meant certain death, and moving forward meant possible death, and possible was better than certain. These small groups of ordinary men, most of them teenagers, most of them from small towns and farms and factories across America, started dismantling the Atlantic Wall one machine gun nest at a time. By noon, just 5.5 hours after the first ramp dropped, Omaha Beach was secured. The cost was staggering. Over 2,000 American soldiers died on that beach in a single morning. 2,000 men who had mothers and fathers and brothers and girls waiting for them at home. 2,000 men who had never asked to be heroes and became them anyway, in the worst possible circumstances imaginable. But because of those 2,000, and because of the men who kept moving when everything in them screamed to stop, the beach was taken, and the door into Nazi-occupied Europe was opened, and the war turned in a direction it never turned back from. So here is the question this whole video has been building toward. Could you have survived 1 hour on D-Day's beaches? And the honest answer, sitting here today in comfort and safety, is almost certainly no. Not because you are not brave enough, not because you are not strong enough, but because what those men faced on June 6, 1944, was beyond any reasonable measure of what a human being should be asked to endure. The cold, the noise, the chaos, the weight, the fear, the loss happening all around them every second. It was not survivable by any normal standard. But here is what is important to understand. The men who were there were not superhuman. They were not specially selected for bravery. They were 19 and 20-year-old kids from places you have driven through without stopping. They were scared. Every single one of them was terrified. The ones who survived said so openly. The difference between the ones who made it and the ones who didn't was not the absence of fear. It was what they did with it. They used it. They let it push their legs forward one step at a time across 200 yards of the most dangerous ground in human history. And because they did that, because those ordinary men made that impossible choice on that gray morning in June 1944, you are watching this video today, in a free country, in a free world, That is not a small thing. That is everything. Drop a comment below and tell me honestly, could you have taken that first step off the ramp? Because I think about that question every time I read about this day, and I am still not sure I know the answer.